When lawmakers established the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority in 1947, they granted it a blank check. Oklahoma taxpayers have been underwriting that check ever since. The legislature created OTA and gave it extensive statutory powers to finance, build, and maintain the Turner Turnpike. The Turner Turnpike has evolved into a network of toll roads and related infrastructure which we call the Turnpike system. Authorities, like the OTA, occupy a unique space in Oklahoma legal framework. They are not state agencies. OTA, for instance, receives none of its revenue from the legislature via appropriations. However, authorities are created by statute and authorized by law to carry out certain duties on behalf of the state. Unlike state agencies, authorities are allowed to take out debt based on their ability to maintain a secure revenue stream.
Bear with us as we straighten out these audio issues. We'll just cut the mic entirely. The mic's up there.
Authorities are created by statute and authorized by law to carry out certain duties on behalf of the state. Unlike state agencies, authorities are allowed to take out debt based on their ability to maintain a secure revenue stream. The ability to incur debt by selling bonds on the open market has allowed OTA to build and maintain infrastructure on a much larger scale and at a much faster pace than what ODOT is capable of. Of course, the cost of OTA's debt and the infrastructure it builds ultimately falls on the drivers in the form of tolls. This is the first investigative audit of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority in its nearly 80-year history. When the Attorney General requested this audit, he did not raise any specific allegations. However, he did point to a wide array of concerns brought to his attention by lawmakers as well as private citizens. My office has investigated these concerns. We have examined multiple operations within the OTA system and analyzed more than $1 billion in expenditures over a 2-year period. Today I'm going to walk you through some of the weak processes we uncovered at OTA, beginning with irregular contracting practices and conflicts of interest, all connected to the Access program, a massive multi-billion-dollar expansion and modernization initiative. I will spend the majority of our time talking about these topics. I will also address questions related to the bond issuance process, land acquisitions as well as auctions, and OTA's relationships with state agencies, including transactions between OTA and ODOT. However, to begin, I want to emphasize that under current statute, OTA's legal powers are very broad. OTA's statutory powers include the right to acquire new land by eminent domain, the right to design and build new roads along routes approved by the legislature, and to finance those roads by issuing bonds, and the right to collect tolls and raise rates to pay bond obligations. My team found that for the most part, OTA has acted within its legal rights. Many of the public's most pressing concerns about OTA can only be resolved by amending legislation. Given the extensive number of concerns voiced by the public and echoed by the Attorney General, the legislature may want to consider revisiting relevant statutes and creating additional guardrails for OTA. However, it's also worth considering the structure of the current system before any changes are made. It goes without saying, but any transfer of responsibilities from OTA to ODOT would place a substantial financial burden on taxpayers. And given ODOT's inability to incur debt, it would be impossible for the agency to expand or maintain infrastructure in the same manner as OTA. That said, let's begin by discussing the Access project. Access is an enormous undertaking. The project, which is mostly centered in the greater Oklahoma City area, will include 3 new toll corridors. There are also plans to widen 3 existing toll roads. The estimated cost of the Access program were originally projected to be around $5 billion. OTA is currently authorized to incur more than $8 billion in debt to pay for this specific project. There is no statutory limit on the amount of debt OTA can incur. The Access project was unveiled at an OTA board meeting, followed by a press conference in February 2022. OTA has the authority to announce new projects in consultation with Audit, the Oklahoma Transportation Commission, and the Treasurer's Office, as long as just one condition is met. Any new routes must have been approved by the legislature before they are announced. The Access routes had all been approved in statute in the 1980s. A Supreme Court's decision cleared the way for OTA to begin moving through the extensive bond issuance process. To date, OTA has incurred more than $1.5 billion in debt to finance Access, though, as I mentioned, the board has authorized more than $8 billion. OTA resumed the design phase of the Access project in February 2024. During the design phase, OTA's engineering partners drew up plans for new routes and interchanges. Construction is expected to begin this year. With the construction phase looming, land acquisition has become a more urgent issue. As of February 6th this year, OTA had closed on 88 land acquisitions to make way for the new Access roadways. I will discuss land acquisition later in the press conference. First, I will address contracting practices. OTA routinely conducts road design, construction, and maintenance via contractors. OTA did not follow its normal practices when selecting contractors for the design phase of Access. For Access, OTA secured responses to a letter of interest from 17 contractors, all engineering firms interested in working on the design phase of the project. OTA placed 12 of these prospective engineering contractors on a short list and then named them as prime contractors. Prime contractors could be approved on an as-needed basis for on-demand services. That means the 12 prime engineering contractors were pre-selected to be on standby to support the Access project. There is no statutory requirement for OTA to competitively bid professional services. There is, however, a legal requirement that OTA keep cost to a minimum. Without competitive bidding, contractors have no incentive to lower their prices. OTA could not produce documentation showing that it had made any attempt to negotiate contractor pricing downward. Another issue we discovered was that OTA could not produce records to justify the selection of any given prime contractor for specific on-demand services. How did OTA decide which of the 12 prime contractors was right for any given job? According to interviews with multiple staff members, it appears that in some cases, the OTA director simply chose the prime contractor he wanted without any documented explanation of the choice. It also looks like the 12 prime contractors were allowed to name their prices. What distinguished the 12 prime contractors from the original pool of the 17 engineering firms? According to OTA, one of the factors was a contractor's ability to hire subcontractors. Given the enormous scope of the Access project, OTA said primes had to be capable of subcontracting out work to other firms as needed. However, OTA did not put any guardrails in place to prevent the 12 prime contractors from subcontracting with one another. The arrangement creates a situation in which the prime contractors could potentially share billing information with one another. I'm not saying that coordination has occurred. I'm saying that OTA has not put any guardrails in place to prevent it. Yet the OTA director has admitted that access costs are rising precipitously. The OTA director has said publicly the access program's costs have doubled since 2021. It is crucial that OTA review current contractor pricing and verify that it's reasonable and consistent with market rates. Again, OTA has a legal obligation to keep costs to a minimum. OTA does not necessarily have a financial incentive to keep costs to a minimum. OTA is allowed to take on as much debt as their own board will consent to and as much debt as the market will accept. OTA has never had any problems making payments on time or attracting new investors. The toll roads are well traveled, which means OTA has a steady stream of toll revenue. That is why OTA's bonds are seen as a very safe investment by those who purchase them. All of this ensures that OTA continues to have access to a seemingly unlimited line of credit. OTA has little incentive to negotiate contractor prices down or to avoid additional debt, because OTA has the ability to raise toll rates to pay for that debt. OTA collects more than $1 million per day in toll revenue, and there's no statutory limit on the amount of toll revenue that OTA can collect in order to pay for the increasing debt. The legislature of 1947 granted OTA a blank check, and Oklahomans have been underwriting that check ever since 1947. This setup is allowed by law because, again, there is no statutory limit on the amount of debt that OTA can incur. Besides irregular contracting practices, we also noticed two potential conflicts of interest among OTA's prime engineering contractors. One involves the Access Program Manager. We're going to refer to this as Contractor 1. Contractor 1 has already been paid more than $16 million for program management, even though construction has not yet begun, and their contract has been modified multiple times to authorize additional payment. The reason I'm concerned about this vendor is that Contractor 1's involvement in access goes beyond program management. Contractor 1 has a separate contract to oversee right-of-way services, that is the land acquisition. That means the Access Program Manager is also handling the land acquisition process, for which it has been paid more than $2.9 million. Even more concerning, Contractor 1 was also chosen to be one of the 12 prime contractors. So even though Contractor 1 is the program manager for the entire Access project, Contractor 1's dual role as a program manager and as a prime contractor is a conflict of interest. As the program manager, Contractor 1 manages invoice intake. That includes any invoices Contractor 1 may submit. That creates risk. Basic accounting practices would preclude a contractor from handling their own invoices without an additional layer of oversight. That is why it's so important for OTA staff to verify Contractor 1's invoices before payment. OTA staff do review invoices, but staff have indicated that due to the high volume of project access invoices and the ambiguity of some of these invoices, it's impossible for OTA to review all of them thoroughly. That constitutes an unacceptable level of financial risk. OTA has a legal responsibility to keep costs to a minimum, and OTA needs to conduct proper oversight for each and every invoice and verify receipt of contractor services before issuing payments. That will help ensure that OTA fully complies with its legal obligations. Additionally, as program manager, Contractor 1 supports OTA's financial reporting system through a data platform. That data platform tracks access expenditures in real time, and it projects future cost. Contractor 1's data platform helps OTA decide when to seek additional bond revenue. That means contractor 1 plays a role in determining when additional bond money is necessary. Contractor 1 also has a financial interest in OTA's acquisition of more revenue. We also found potential conflicts of interest related to another OTA vendor who we will refer to as Contractor 2. Contractor 2 also serves in multiple roles, one of which is the engineering consultant. The consulting engineer. In this position, Contractor 2 represents the interest of the bondholders. As the consultant engineer, Contractor 2 analyzes the condition of toll roads and makes recommendations about maintenance. The reason is that if toll roads are well maintained, they will be well traveled and the toll revenue will remain strong. Strong revenue will allow OTA to make debt payments to bondholders on time. In another role, Contractor 2 determines the budget for maintenance projects. The conflict is Contractor 2 also serves as one of the 12 prime contractors for the Access program. That means Contractor 2 is responsible for recommending new projects and then can also, on the other side, try to obtain the contracts as a contractor. OTA needs to establish better internal controls to make sure that the conflicts of interest we identified are addressed and that no contractor has an opportunity to game the system to its own advantage. In the audit report, we offer extensive recommendations to OTA and the legislature to help them resolve these issues quickly. Doing so will help OTA comply fully with its legal obligation to keep costs to a minimum. That in turn would help keep toll rates from rising at a faster pace going forward. We also looked at the bond issuance process. OTA must follow a 14-step process. Some have been under the misunderstanding that OTA has unilateral authority to obtain financing for new roads or other purposes. It's important to note that other officials have responsibilities within the bond issuance process as well. Multiple officials and agencies are also part of the conversation about whether new roads are necessary and feasible. As part of the bond issuance process, OTA must conduct traffic studies that project whether new routes are feasible. OTA can only sell bonds after going through all of these steps. We examined the bond issuance process in depth, and we found that OTA met all legal requirements. Regarding land acquisitions, the Oklahomans most impacted by the Access program are those who will lose their homes. There is an 8-step process in place that regulates OTA's land acquisition. My team did a thorough evaluation of this process, and we found that OTA met its legal obligations in relation to land acquisitions. Most property owners affected by land acquisition choose to negotiate with OTA on the sale of their land. OTA refers to those negotiations as advanced acquisitions. We reviewed all advanced acquisitions for the Access program, and we found that OTA bought most properties at a price that exceeded the appraisal value. When property owners resist negotiations, OTA can initiate the condemnation process, by which it has the right to take land in exchange for a just compensation. From 2019 to 2025, OTA initiated condemnation 6 times. In 3 cases, it was due to issues related to the title of land rather than to an unwillingness of the owners to negotiate. Only 1 case resulted in condemnation whereby a property owner's land was taken and the owner was paid what an appraiser deemed a fair price. It is very rare for OTA to use its rights of eminent domain to obtain land against the will of the property owner. There are circumstances in which OTA only requires a small portion of the parcel of land. In many of those cases, the owner chooses to sell the entire parcel of land. That is how OTA ends up with surplus land, which it is authorized to sell at auction. My team reviewed the OTA's land auctions. We found no violations of law. One of the concerns the Attorney General raised was certain transactions between OTA and ODOT. Lacking a specific allegation, we did examine OTA's relationship with ODOT giving particular attention to 25 shared service agreements as well as all payments from OTA to ODOT from 2021 to 2025. We found no violations of the law. All shared service agreements and payments appear to have been reasonable. We noted several irregularities with regard to OTA's relationship with the Department of Public Safety. By an agreement and statute, OTA funds a portion of DPS's payroll, benefits, and equipment cost. By law, OTA is only allowed to cover the cost of two things: patrolling the turnpike system and partial funding of the patrol academy for new troopers who help police the turnpikes. Yet OTA could not verify that it was only covering costs that pertain to toll roads. We recommend that OTA review current practices with legal counsel, especially in light of the statutory obligation to keep costs to a minimum. When the Attorney General requested this audit, he did not provide any specific allegations. The wide array of concerns he alluded to were very broad. Without any concrete allegations to investigate, we went through his list of concerns one by one. We also identified areas of risk. That resulted in a voluminous, lengthy audit. Related to the Access program, we examined engineering and design contractors, the bond issuance process, and land acquisitions. We also examined surplus land and land auctions from previous projects, OTA transactions with multiple state agencies, the Gilcrease Turnpike, which operates on a separate financial system from the other toll roads, and OTA's flow of funds structure. The main issue we discovered within OTA's operations were some of its contracting practices. OTA left a thin paper trail when it comes to engineering contracts. There is really no written documentation to justify the selection of engineering contractors or to prove that OTA negotiated prices in favor of the taxpayers. That leaves a lot of room for questions. I'm calling for a more transparent process for engineering contractor selection and for thorough documentation of the process from beginning to end. I am also calling on OTA to eliminate all potential conflicts of interest and to verify receipt of services for every single contractor before issuing payment. These are basic accounting practices, and we have given OTA extensive recommendations on how to close these gaps. What this audit highlights is just how broad, unrestrained, and unchecked OTA's legal authority is. I said that OTA was granted a blank check underwritten by Oklahoma taxpayers and by more than $1 million it collects daily for tolls. It's very important to remember that the law allows for this. It is also important to remember that legislators can amend these laws at any time. Thank you, and I'll take your questions at this time.
Yes, I think I speak for everyone in the room and everyone watching the live stream. Why did this audit take so long?
Because of the voluminous request. Typically, whenever we are asked to do an investigative audit, there is some allegation of a crime, some allegation of wrongdoing. We were told to go audit the Turnpike Authority. Because my office is not responsible for conducting the annual financial audit of the Turnpike Authority, they are allowed to contract out for that service and choose their auditor. We were asked to go in on an agency, not an agency, on an authority, which is a political subdivision. We had to gain an understanding of how this operates, and then we had to look at essentially everything with no real direction into any criminal allegations.
Did that take place right after the state attorney general demanded this audit?
No, and if you were to go back, you would know that I told the attorney general that it would not be started for an entire year after that request was given to us. At that time, we had quite a backlog in investigative audits.
Can you identify contractor 1 and contractor 2?
That'll be in the work papers. I think that the focus really needs to be on OTA's processes, on how they allow these contractors to be awarded, but I'd be happy to get you that information after this press conference.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Did the fact that OTA had never been audited before play into the length of time it took for this?
Of course it did. Whenever you don't have a history of working with an agency and understanding how they maintain their records, all of the laws that apply to them, and the fact that this is a very complex agency handling many different divisions, of course that's going to take extra time to go in and gain the understanding, learn the laws, and then look at the finances to see what's gone wrong. Yes.
When you look at the Gilcrease Turnpike, I know that was kind of a partnership between OTA and then the county and kind of a few different agencies there. And it's my understanding that there was a 1 mile stretch of county-maintained road there that the turnpike was built on top of, essentially. Could you find any sort of evidence that taxpayer-supported road the turnpike replaced, or the taxpayers compensated at all for that road being taken away? And also, can you speak to anything you've noticed between the relationship between the OTA and the other government agencies involved in that project?
In that specific project with the Gilcrease Turnpike, the Gilcrease Turnpike was something that was unique to the turnpike system. What we found during our investigation was that they complied with the law. We did not find any violations of that. And as far as taxpayers being compensated, taxpayers are still driving on that road, and any negotiations would have happened at the local level for that. We did not audit that.
Did you find any evidence of negotiations happening at the local level from the local officials?
No, but they would have had to have went through some of the authorities at the local level to have started that process. Did you have another question?
I've got another question. The OTA through all this process, at the start of it, talked about how they've got clean audits every year with their own auditor. Yet that auditor didn't catch any of these contracting irregularities, conflicts of interest. A, did that auditor fail to do a thorough audit? And second, should there be an investigative audit or an outside audit like from your office from here on out?
Okay. My job was not to go back and audit the work of a previous CPA who conducted that audit, but it's very important to note that that was an annual financial statement audit that was done with the sole purpose of determining if the numbers presented on the financial statements accurately reflected the financial position of the Turnpike Authority. And this is what I make sure I remind everyone of whenever they're thinking about school districts or municipalities who have annual financial statement audits. Those audits are not done with the mission of determining whether or not an entity followed the law. It's about the numbers. An investigative audit is about, typically it's about some type of criminal allegation that we go in to audit. Since we didn't have that here, we did go in to look to see, did they follow the relevant laws that taxpayers would have expected them to follow? Now going forward, I think it is important that taxpayers understand the different types of audits going on out here. At the state level, we do an annual financial audit of the state's financial statement, which includes all agencies, and it is so high level, you are never going to get to the bottom of whether or not these agencies are fully compliant with the laws being passed. That's why it is important for taxpayers to advocate for performance audits. Performance audits would give you the answers that I think you might be looking for as to whether or not an agency is being efficient and effective, and they are giving you the best return for your investment in them.
And they've not had performance audits.
To my knowledge, there has not been a performance audit done by any outside CPA firm, and certainly not by the state auditor's office.
So what I'm hearing you say is they should have performance audits.
I believe all state agencies should have performance audits, and I believe that the Turnpike Authority also should have a performance audit. Yes.
How much did this audit cost?
I don't have that number available, but I'd be happy to get that for you. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, since the Turnpike Authority hasn't been audited in the history of their existence, and they've been around for a really long time now, and you weren't given a very narrow scope to dig into, would you recommend that the legislature enact a law or something that would require the OTA to do a more in-depth, maybe maybe once a year or once every 2 years, and maybe look at specific that they can, because it sounds like you guys weren't able to dig in as much as you would like to because it was so broad. And so would it be helpful to do a more in-depth, more focused area of investigation every couple of years?
Yeah. I would want to first point out, there is an annual financial statement audit done, but there has not been any other type of audits to my knowledge. But the short answer is absolutely yes. I think that it would be wise for the legislature to ask the state auditor's office to conduct performance audits on the varying divisions to see how we could help that authority be the best it can be for the taxpayers. Yes, Senator?
Thank you for your preparation, and, I know that you were doing a lot of audits for that first year, and I remember you saying it would take a while to get started because you were investigating at least 3 agencies, I can remember. So, I'm wanting to know what kind of audit is the typical audit that would address conflicts of interest that you described with contractor 1 and contractor 2? Would that be a performance audit by an outside entity? Would it be a performance audit within the entity? Would it be an audit that the state auditor should be doing? Who is in the best situation to address those types of conflicts of interest?
Well, Senator, respectfully, I would ask that the first step be to make sure we have laws on the books that clearly identify conflicts of interest with clear consequences for what will happen whenever you violate that. But what you're talking about would be an investigative audit, and I do believe the state auditor's office would be the most, the best choice for that type of audit. I also want to point out, I am working with 25% fewer employees than this agency had 15 years ago. So that's something very important to note. Whenever you have a reduced staff, you will not get to audits as quickly as you would like, as noted by the frequent calls from you kind reporters about asking for the status of that audit. So I just want to make sure we remind you of that as well. We always are working diligently to get these audits conducted and get good results to the decision makers who can help fix some of these problems.
I just
So,
have one
yes, sir.
follow-up, can I real quick? I know, you said on the auditing standard in your presentation, you said, y'all have the term for the best practices. in
Basic
auditing.
accounting
Yeah.
practices.
So are you saying that needs to be in statute, that we can't just rely that financial people are gonna meet that standard, it needs to be into statute?
Basic accounting practices that I was referring to was reviewing invoices for accuracy prior to paying a contractor. The conflicts of interest are something that needs to be put into statute.
Did your audit happen to look into the Turnpike Authority's practice of cross-pledging its funds? Turnpike projects? I know there have been some ideas out there to possibly do away with that, and how might that affect the Turnpike Authority's feasibility moving forward?
And you've just made my argument for why we need a performance audit conducted. This type of audit would not have looked into that issue.
Just to be
Yes.
clear, did this audit include interviews with OTA's current and previous executive directors?
It included interviews with the current executive director. We met with him again this morning, although we do keep the entities updated as we go along on the issues we're finding, and we give them ample time to give us feedback for any additional documentation we may need to clear a finding. But yes, that has been ongoing.
Did it include conversations with any other authorities on transportation throughout Oklahoma?
No, it did not.
Tim Getz, did
No.
they include him?
Now, I'm sure he may have been interviewed in the work papers, and there were different people interviewed. I want to back up on that. There were different people interviewed in our work papers. Again, those work papers are open for you to look at, but every issue that we looked into, we made sure we met and interviewed the appropriate officials who would have been able to give us the information needed at that time.
I don't know if you can answer this, but you've conducted the audit, you're recommending more transparency for the OTA to eliminate conflicts of interest. What if that doesn't happen?
As the state auditor, my responsibility is to give taxpayers and those who can make decisions all the information they need to solve a problem. I can't force any changes, but I do encourage taxpayers to advocate on behalf of those changes being made.
Was your team able to come up with cost, how much is conflict of interest, or other arrangement that could have been done better? How much that could have cost?
No, because there was no criminal allegation here, there was not a cost calculated to determine if there was anything further. It was just a matter of the structure and process in place allowed for a conflict of interest, and that needs to be fixed immediately. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming, and if there's anything more that you need, please feel free to reach out to Andrew Spino. He'll get your questions answered or any additional documentation you need.